Michael Kugelman is also joining us from Washington. I wanted to get some perspective from there. And Michael gets trolled all the time for what he writes on India and Pakistan, by the way. He's a strategic affairs analyst. But Michael, why should international opinion matter to the Indian government? Just sum that up for us. Why should it matter what the US Congress thinks of us, these debates that are going on there? Should we care?
Well, I think that for a country like India that aspires to be a world power and wants to be seen as a responsible power should be susceptible to criticism and should be willing to acknowledge, if not accept, that criticism. I think it's only natural that forces as powerful as the international media should be seen as important for this Indian government. And I think another way of putting this is, does the Indian government actually care? Does it really care about what the world thinks? And I know that some would argue that no, it doesn't really have to care. It's going to do what it wants to do. These issues that have attracted criticism overseas are internal matters for India. But my response to that was, well, look, if the Indian government really didn't care about what the world thinks, why would it so often be so critical of negative international press coverage? Why would the Indian government hire lobbyists? It just hired another one in Washington a few weeks ago. So I think that's really what it comes down to. And just to make another point here, these hits to the image of the Indian government, I think they clearly go back some time to earlier in the year, back to the confrontation with Pakistan, when you had the Pulwama attack and then the Balakot strike, at a time in which India came under a lot of criticism to the point that it affected India's brand when there was this suggestion that the Indian government may not have been completely truthful about what really happened in Balakot, and then it began to politicize that whole confrontation with Pakistan on the campaign trail. I think that's where the hits to the government's image began. And so, this is quite extraordinary as well, given that the Prime Minister had done such a great job to repair his image early on in his term. I mean, when you're sharing a stage with the likes of Jay-Z and Beyonce in Central Park at a charity conference, your image is in a pretty good position. So for it to be where it is now, for Modi and for the government to be struggling in terms of how it's perceived, I think that's significant. Final note, though, I wouldn't go too far with suggesting that you have these major hits to India, to the government's images. Certainly they're there, but at the end of the day, I think the world still stands with India on many fronts, particularly when it comes to the issue of terrorism. The U.S. government certainly wants to continue to engage with India. Countries and investors, I think, still want to do business with and engage with India. But certainly it's getting difficult as it's come under the shadow of these hits to India's image. And, it all comes down to the fact that for so long, democracy has been so closely associated with India's brand.
That's at the heart of it, that India is a democracy.
It's worn that, right. It's worn that like a badge of honor. And now you have these things happening that suggest it's taking a hard turn away from democracy.
Ambassador Casey Singh, just on this point, because Michael raised this point about Balakot and everything that happened, there was a very interesting piece. I don't know who wrote it last week. I don't recall the name, but the writer made the point that, in a sense, because India's actions, whether in Kashmir or with the citizenship protests, are coming under so much international criticism, and Pakistan is actually quiet, in a sense, it's a given that the international community will support us when it comes to the issue of cross-border terrorism. But that right now, we are kind of shooting ourselves in the foot with the international community with our own actions, because right now people are focusing on the Indian government's undemocratic actions, rather than focusing on a genuine problem with cross-border terrorism that exists. And so the focus has actually shifted away from that to this, which shouldn't actually happen. Do you agree?
Well, let me just first go back. What your Washington interlocutor said, it's true, India can live with it. It's not that it's life-threatening for India. Yeah. But when you start, and particularly when their economic headwinds are negative, when global environment, global economy is slowing down, you had Arvind Subramaniam on your channel, presenting the graphs, which were frightening, to say that the economy is close to stalling. That when that is happening, why is the government busy with a socio-cultural agenda? And why is that agenda focused on electoral cycles? Because remember that 370 came before Maharashtra election, and we've seen the result, and it was used electorally, but we've seen the result in Haryana and Maharashtra. And CAA was used in Jharkhand, and we can see the result there. So therefore, the signal, people of India are sending a signal back that we elected you to govern India. Please govern India. Please don't get distracted by this.